From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
One of the single most boring rituals that we have to go through each and every year when it comes to politics is the countdown to the budget.
Tunnel vision on the budget with 3 weeks to go.
Federal budget is 3 weeks away.
Oh, the countdown, what will they do? Now, of course, they got all the numbers wrong last year, but nobody cares. We'll all barrel in and double check on all of their different numbers. But the reality is that one thing is going to be similar to last year's budget, and that is that this government is getting ready to post yet another surplus. Now remember, their own intergenerational report suggested we would have nothing but deficits for the next 40 years, so who cares what happens this year? The reality is that Australia is in a structural deficit where the government spends more money than it makes, but this is what the Treasurer says as part of this dance to the first week in May.
In terms of our fiscal strategy, we are still aiming for a second surplus. We feel like the first surplus last year, the first in 15 years, was an important way to put downward pressure on inflation. So our objective is still a second surplus. We're not there yet.
But of course, if it's a surplus, it is a surplus that means the government has more money than even they can spend. It's also one where they have extra money where they could cut petrol taxes. But of course, they choose not to because that's how they're going to get to a budget surplus. Remember, $1,500 was the automatic tax return people got during the tough times of the COVID pandemic, but financially there's not a lot different for Australians and the cost of living crisis rolls on. Will they be giving you back the automatic $1,500? No, because they've got to keep a surplus. When it comes to a whole series of decisions that they have made to increase taxes here, there and everywhere, will they be changing any of those to get to their surplus?
No. There's no way.
No way.
No.
No. No. No. No. No.
No.
No.
No.
Yeah, despite the fact that they took money away from you, they made things more expensive and they chose to not release some of the tension that's in the system when it comes to things like petrol tax. Remember, they inherited 23 cents in the dollar, per litre, 23 cents per litre. They are now at 49 cents per litre, the highest that we have ever got to. Oh no, but it's all still about cost of living, isn't it?
And you can expect to see in the budget a focus on cost of living help. A tax cut for every taxpayer will be the centrepiece of the cost of living help in the budget.
Seriously? They hinted at this towards the end of last year. They announced it in January. It doesn't come into effect until July, but we're going to go around and again tell everyone that too little, too late tax cuts will be enough to change people's lives. How many times do I have to show people this graphic before it'll be understood in Canberra that, sorry, Australians are not going to be doing backflips over $15 a week, let alone $32, $41 or $22 a week? Oh, and this brings me to something as well, which is more proof about how they lied and always lied. Remember, we have no plans to change this system whatsoever. We were told over and over again, and the Prime Minister famously lied when he said,
My word is my bond.
and remember at the time when all of this was announced, it was only a last-minute decision ticked off on Cabinet. It was all fast-moving action. Nobody had done the hard work.
That's when we changed our position.
So the evolution of that thinking, that's a quote from you on January the 15th.
Yeah.
So at that point on that day, is that an honest answer to the question that the government's position hasn't changed?
Yes, it is. We hadn't changed our position until the Cabinet did.
So they changed the position in January of 2024. Well, lo and behold, that was garbage. You knew it was garbage then, and we know it's garbage now. Because Freedom of Information requests have shown that this government has been working on the details of doing what they have done with too little, too late tax cuts, not since June 2023, but weeks after they became the government in June of 2022. The only way we know this, of course, is through the Freedom of Information process, but because the assumption is you're not going to pay attention to it, the lie that they gave us in January is an even deeper lie, because it was one where they didn't just change at the last minute. They've been doing the work since June of 2022 to do it. That said, fake news is abounding right now. I say that because the headline of the Canberra Times is a little different than what the Treasurer actually said today. by pretending that there's more cost of living relief that's on the cards for the federal budget. Now, he says that the bulk of the money, the biggest whack that'll be there for cost of living, is $15 per week in the too little too late tax cuts. But here's what he actually said today and why I think that headline is a little off the mark.
If we can afford to do a little more than that, then those decisions will be taken in the next week or two as well.
Now, of course, my frustration that has always been there with this government, you share it too, is they promised a reality in Australia that would be very different than the one that we're actually living. Remember this promise from the election a couple of years ago, that everything is going up, but a Labor government will lower the cost of living. Well, let's just have a look at how that's going right now. Let me run you through a bunch of headlines here, including from the ABC, saying that new data shows that households are under extreme cost of living stress. Meantime, 9.4 million Australians have less than $1,000 in the bank, and of those people, the average is only $210 that's in the bank. Over 1 million people have missed their credit card payments on their way towards 2 million people. Not to mention food security. 3.7 million people last year weren't able to put a meal on the table, so they ended up going to places like Food Bank. The federal government, rather than giving them a huge amount of extra money, of course, is going to spend $40 million on marketing the too little too late tax cuts, but only $15 million is going to go to a whole collection of charities to deal with the reality of what people are living right now. And put simply, when it comes to cost of living, the pressure that is there is extreme. Not my word, it's from consumer websites. They track this stuff every single week. They've concluded that Australians right now under this dial are in extreme financial pressure right now. Well, there's a whole bunch of cost of living concerns that exist for them right now, which is why we are starting to see the reality of Labor's failure to actually deal with cost of living. Too little too late tax cuts based off lies, full of spin and then rammed down our throats with taxpayer dollars. Australians won't buy it. Because regardless of even if you're the most ardent Labor supporter, you know that $15 a week is not going to touch the sides, especially when everything from your groceries to your petrol has gone up way more than just $15 a week. There's even a plan to increase your council rates in Queensland by more than $400 in the next 12 months. But thankfully the polls are now starting to show that people have worked out that it is the government, Labor, Chalmers, Albo, Gallagher, that told you things would be better, but the reality is they have got worse. The Resolve poll that I went into in some detail last night, the joy of having a Sunday night show, make sure you join us there each and every week, same time, but on a Sunday night. It shows that Labor's vote is falling to a new low. Their vote is down 12%, the primary vote, in the past 12 months. According to this pollster, we're now looking at Labor and the coalition tied at 50-50 right now when it comes to the two-party preferred. It also shows in that poll that there's been an increase to now 55% of Australians who say that they would struggle to afford a major expense. That major expense could be a new fridge because you need it, car repairs because you need them. Meantime, News poll today shows a little better for the government, but not in terms of its majority. 51-49 is 2PP, but Labor would lose 4, the Libs would gain 4, and at this stage there wouldn't be a huge amount of change when it comes to what's going to happen with the Teals. But this means it'll be a minority government. A minority government where the Greens would be the tail that wags the dog. The Greens who don't know the difference between profit and turnover. The Greens who believe that the government can set supermarket prices. The Greens who believe that they can set rent increases. The Greens who think that the federal government should be able to overrule the Reserve Bank. That's the madness that's on its way if the numbers keep going the way they do, and they will keep going this way because the government talks a big game on cost of living. But even when they're trying to pre-hype a budget, they're still telling you the single biggest thing will be too little too late tax cuts. That's the reality, something that is certainly being noted by the opposition.
That's why we're focused on these cost of living measures.
They're kind of not believing you though, are they?
Well, I think people are doing it tough.
My apologies, that's Natalie Barr saying the obvious on Sunrise this morning. She ain't part of the opposition. But still, interesting when even breakfast television is now starting to notice in the cuddly little weekly chats with our politicians who one day would like to be leader, that Australians don't believe Labor when it comes to cost of living. Now, Australians may well have been distracted. The gallery may well wish to distract. But as they did at the last budget where they ignored the reality of the tax increases, in the last budget where they ignored 10 million people losing $1,500 automatic tax returns, these are the same people who ignore that $15 a week is apparently enough for a truly struggling Australian family. Well, we're on the ball. We'll keep at it each and every night. And when those budget documents fall, make sure you watch us on budget night. Doesn't matter what all the other coverage is. I appreciate it. But, you know, we'll be the ones that will blast a hole in the HMA's BS that, of course, the Prime Minister and Grim Jim captain each and every day. Now, youth crime. Let's talk about this in Queensland because there's some data. And you know I love showing you the data because while I have a strong opinion, the data remains strong. Youth crime in Queensland has been a problem for way too long. This Labor government needs to learn a lesson. I hope they learn it at the upcoming ballot box. Because people have struggled and struggled for too long, and particularly in regional areas, they need to change their vote to change the government.
We're very grateful that we're still here. Things like this shouldn't be happening.
We've gone from being sad and upset to as a community, overwhelmed with anger.
And until it does affect you, then you don't always realise how much of an impact it is affecting everyday people nowadays, and it is certainly doing that.
This is the first time I've been out in 17 months. If the government says they are helping people, they are not.
Now, the Premier, who of course kept you safe for all those times during the pandemic, who was able to get away with that in 2020, well, she was going to get smashed at this upcoming election. But the previous Premier said this about youth crime.
It is a tough issue, and we are working around the clock to ensure that we have the programs and the laws to keep the community safe.
And the new Premier has said pretty much the same.
Our government's response to youth crime must keep a laser focus on community safety.
But one of the ways that we called this out at the time, that they hoped that they would see a major reduction in youth crime statistics in order to be able to cut ads and tell people you're not feeling the problem. This is not the crime spree that you think it is. Was that they moved a series of drug possession charges out of the criminal sector and moved them into the health sector. About 10% of all youth offending had something to do with drugs, so the expectation was, after this little fiddle, that the numbers would fall by 10%. Here's a nice lady from the ABC explaining how this system would work.
Right now, people caught with less than 50 grams of cannabis for personal use can be referred to a drug diversion program where they get education, counselling or treatment. Laws before Parliament will expand that to the full spectrum of illicit drugs, including cocaine, heroin, MDMA, as well as non-medical use of certain pharmaceuticals.
Now, this was all about fiddling with the numbers. Well, guess what? It didn't work because the numbers that have just been released by the Queensland statistician, they make for difficult reading. As the Courier Mail put today, a huge explosion in the amount of break-ins and car theft and juvenile offenders. Now let's get into this with some detail here because this report is a crime report into Queensland in the calendar year of 22-23, so we're not even near the stats that are around today. But when it says about youth offending, they tell us that it is up by almost 10%. There are 57,410 youth offenders in Queensland. They committed 18 homicides. They committed 4,000 assaults. They committed 514 sexual offences. Of the 57,000 youth offenders, up by 8.6% in the past 12 months, 1,300 were involved in robbery, 10,000 were involved in the unlawful entry to a property, 4,000 were involved in property damage. And again, 57,410 youth offenders up in the past 12 months. The unlawful use of a motor vehicle was 7,687 and theft was 12,842. And we're not talking about petty crime here, we're talking about serious crime, hardcore crime. And these are the numbers between people of the age of 10 to 17. This is why you have a movement of people who want to move the age of criminal responsibility closer to 17, because while all of these crimes will still happen, no one will be being held accountable. It's like the drug laws, where if you move them out of the criminal system, then you don't count them anymore as crimes, and therefore crime is being solved. But the crimes that are committed to pay for the drugs continue and continue. And certainly, when people would be able to have less criminal responsibility, the younger that they were, it would mean that the crimes you can get away with, and then the drugs you can get away with. But it's not just youth offending. Have a look at this. The overall offending in Queensland is through the roof. All offences are up by 13.5%. And this is only to July last year. Crimes against the person, up 17%. Offences against property, up 17%. Other offences are up 8%. So no matter which way they want to spin it, crime is up, way up. It's way up when it's being committed by young people, and it's way up when it's being committed by everyone over the age of 18. Now, you would think that today would have been, with all of those numbers, a terrible day for the Premier having to explain away the reality of the past 12 months under his Labor government. Oh no, but these are the masters of spin. We didn't get response to the crime statistics today. Instead, we got the acting Police Commissioner being confirmed as the ongoing Police Commissioner. All the promises of let's get tough, this, that and the other. But of course, when you're introducing the new guy who's going to take all responsibility, you, the Premier, don't have to answer any serious questions. Well, thankfully, the alternative Premier is David Crucifulli, and he was more than happy to provide some answers about a problem that Queensland is really buckling under.
Changing the Commissioner runs a distant second to changing the laws. And until we rewrite the Youth Justice Act, the youth crime crisis will continue in Queensland. And we want Queenslanders to know we are focused about giving police the laws they need to do their job. The government watered them down. If government changes in October, the Making Queensland Safer laws will be laws by the end of the year, and that will give police the tools they need to do their job. And if we change the laws, we give police the tools they need to do their job. That stops police officers leaving the service in droves, that attracts the best and brightest. That's the solution to the youth crime crisis that's gripping the state.
Now, as lefties used to say, you never let a good crisis go to waste. And a perfect example of that is the plan to censor the internet. You've heard me talk about it a lot. I'll continue talking about it a lot until it's defeated. Everyone from this news organisation all the way through to the Human Rights Commission does not like the idea of the federal government being able to decide what you can and can't read on the internet. But the government wants to pretend that the misinformation legislation is all about the stabbing that took place last week, the alleged crime, of course, because somebody is before the courts, and then, of course, the riot that took place at the front of the church. You remember our breaking news coverage from this time last week. That's the image that they want. But the reality is that the people who are truly will be the focus of the misinformation laws. I want you not to focus stabbings and riots. I want you to remember the lady who was arrested in her own home, pregnant and in her pyjamas, because she posted something on Facebook the government didn't like. That would be the potential consequence here. While they turn around and say that it's all about fining social media companies for having wrong things on the internet, the reality is it's about limiting what you can put and what you can see on the internet. Now, I don't have a problem with any videos that are videos of crimes being removed from the internet. I don't have a problem with the attempt to take down live streams in the same way that they have the algorithms that if you use commercial music, you're not able to post your own video. They would be able to stop a lot of this stuff in its tracks. But remember what this government has declared war on. Way before there was an event in Bondi, way before there was an event in Fairfield. It's what they believe was the reason the Voice went from 60-40 yes to 60-40 no.
Misinformation.
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 The misinformation which is there.
Some misinformation.
Now, under the current legislation, it is ambiguous about who this applies to. What I think they want to try to achieve is that legitimate news organisation like ours, legitimate opinion offerings like mine, would be effectively censored, because every time somebody from a left-wing think tank, and we've shown you their form over the years, would declare what is not the government narrative to be misinformation. The misinformation, if not taken down, would result in significant fines towards companies like Meta, Google, but you notice they don't say TikTok an awful lot. You want to try and wade through misinformation. That's the place where, of course, so much was spreading around this time last week. Now, there was an interesting move that's happened in the Federal Court this evening, which is the Federal Court has granted the injunction to the E-Safety Commissioner to force Meta to take down, Meta and X, I should say, to take down all of the videos of the alleged stabbing that took place last week. But now we're going to move into a scenario where the government, as I say, is going to try to use this situation as a Trojan horse. They're going to try to say we need laws against misinformation to stop rioters at the front of a church. But does anyone honestly believe that when the event took place at 7 p.m, that the Communications Minister is going to be able to get a ruling out of the Australian Communications and Media Authority or the E-Safety Commissioner within 1 hour? Because that's literally the time that it took for things to get out of control at the front of that church last week. Instead, they're going to pretend that it's all about the crimes, but the reality is, don't think about the riots. Don't think about the stabbings. Think about the lady in handcuffs in her pyjamas while pregnant at the height of COVID, when the government was deciding what was true and not true, what was allowed and not allowed. Increasingly, our conversation has moved away from the traditional places that we used to have it, and it now happens online. But it's desperately important that people are able to read opinions that are unpopular to the government because they call the government to account. That you can read news based off data that, again, is not what the government wants you to see. For example, all the stuff that I just said there about youth crime, we're using their own statistics. But in Queensland, they're in a scenario where just last week their own Labor MPs were going to try to censor the internet from the media being able to show you the crime that is happening in your area. Now, I've been able to clarify the Liberal Party position here, which is to not support the part of the laws that are about going after what you can and can't post on the internet. Their position is about the videos of crimes. But I don't believe that the government is going to heed the resistance that they are getting from everyone from existing news outlets all the way through to the Human Rights Commission. But the stakes couldn't be higher. For people who claim they want to protect the democracy, finding a new and clever way to eventually make it just too hard for social media companies to post the links from the news organisations that the government doesn't like is not a place that any of us, be you on the far left, the far right, or in the great middle in between, believe should actually be the case. And of course, the Greens are grandstanding too. They would like to have a Senate show trial. The person in the dock, fingers being waved at, Elon Musk himself.
Elon Musk should front up to the Australian people. He should front up here to Parliament and argue why his company shouldn't have a social conscience and shouldn't be doing the right thing. I don't think he has the guts to do it, frankly, but he should.
Yes, the war on X, because they don't like that it's not Twitter anymore. No comment whatsoever about Zuckerberg and what Meta does. No comment at all about the Chinese surveillance app, otherwise known as TikTok. No, it's all about Elon Musk, because Elon Musk is a nutty Trump-liker. Seriously, these people don't give them an inch because they know how to turn that inch into about 10 miles, and they're planning to do it as we speak. We will fight each and every night. Make sure you get in contact with your local politician, be they Liberal, be they Labor, be they someone in between, and tell them no to censoring the internet like this. One of the other lies that this Prime Minister has put around for way too long is that his government will be a completely transparent one compared to the evil last one.
A more honest and transparent government going forward.
But this is what it looks like when you ask for documents from this government. These were correspondence between the federal government and released documents to the former Senator Rex Patrick. This is the government that already has 4,441 questions on notice in the Senate that they just won't answer. This is the government that has more than 900 questions about health and aged care that they won't answer. They also have a whole series of problems when it comes to transparency. Again, back to Rex Patrick and the work that he has been doing. Well, he had a very significant win not that long ago. I'll read from his tweet. A big win. The federal court has decided today, and this was last week, that governments, Labor or Liberal, can no longer sweep department ministerial dirt under the carpet. It's a win for greater transparency and accountability for our political system. What that means is that when ministers change their portfolios or when there's a reshuffle, that the documents don't go into the bin, that you would be able to know what was truly happening inside a government in the lead up to a need for a reshuffle. Well, what was that about a new, open and transparent government? Well, guess what? The Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, is appealing the decision. The people who claim that, yes, of course, we are there for more transparency, are trying to fight for a way to keep things darker than they have ever been before. The government has attacked the ruling, according to the Daily Telegraph. That means, of course, that they will be appealing the decision for you to know more about what they're really up to. What was that promise/lie again?
A more honest and transparent government going forward.
In Victoria on the weekend for 420, a famous day for marijuana smokers around the world because that's the day to get high, man. A whole bunch of people decided to smoke what they had, and the police decided to crack down hard in a protest which took place in Melbourne. This was in furtherance of the legalisation or greater availability of marijuana. 60 police officers attended the rally on Saturday. 36 attendees were arrested for drug possession. Why am I telling you about this? Because the issue of the legalisation of marijuana is make or break for members of the upper house of the Victorian Parliament. You see, Labor does not have a clear path or a majority in the upper house. Jacinta Allen, the Premier, needs votes of the Greens and the Legalised Cannabis Party to be able to pass anything into the law. Well, we learned today that the Legalised Cannabis MPs have said they will no longer support anything that the government puts before them as long as people are being arrested for what happened at that protest on the weekend. The Legalised Cannabis MP says this is the crossing of the Rubicon for us. We are genuinely really pissed off at this government. We've reached the point where we don't know what to do with the government anymore. So their ability to even pass legislation may be a problem in Victoria, which is probably good news for Victoria because it means they can do no further damage through the Parliament. Let's see how long legalised cannabis holds on to their principles, or how quickly they fold, or how quickly the process of legalising cannabis gets sped up in Victoria. I predicted it, that this was the reason the people were in the Parliament and the reason the government will probably bend to some version of their demands, whether you like it or not, or whether it's the right or wrong thing to do. One thing got people very excited today in the media, and it was all to do with an act at the Melbourne Comedy Festival.
A breastfeeding mother has been left humiliated after she and her baby were forced to leave a show at the Melbourne Comedy Festival.
A breastfeeding mother says she felt humiliated when high-profile comedian Aj Barker kicked her and her baby out of his show.
The outrage, the wall-to-wall coverage, crime stats in Queensland, no time for that. Well, for the woman who was booted out, she spoke to Tom Elliott this morning on 3AW.
He said, I speak fluent baby, and it said, take me outside. Quite intimidating. At the time, I felt like I'm in a vulnerable position. I'm breastfeeding at the time.
Apologies, there she was on Channel 7. Well, the comedian himself defended his actions and actually explains why he did it.
I'm distressed, to be honest, that so many people are upset. It was never my intention. At the time, I did what I thought I had to do to ensure the enjoyment of the audience for the show.
The fact that he's not willing to stand by the decision that he made is because it was a dumb decision. Now, nobody was observing a minute's silence here. It was a comedy show. If the sound of a crying baby goes on for too long, then it's probably the responsibility of the parent, and I've been in this scenario like you have too, where you just pick up and go. But if it's only for a few seconds, who really cares? And is he really distracted by what he can see from the stage that nobody can see from the back rows? Babies need to be fed. And guess what, boys? That's actually what they're for. Now, in the United States, I look forward to the campaign letters for that, but anyway. 196 days until the election, Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. Will Joe Biden defeat MAGA, or will they make America great again? We'll all have to wait and see. Latest poll came out via NBC in the past 24 hours. It shows Trump leading. It shows Trump leading 46-44. An apparent surge for the former president. But remember, this is not an election that actually matters nationally. It's done in 50 separate states. 10% undecided. Interesting to watch which way they go. But, as you know, it's all about the swing states. And the 7 swing states right now, according to the Real Clear Politics, their average shows Trump winning in Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina and Nevada. If he even only won half of those, he'd be close to winning the presidency. Anything more than half, he would win the presidency back in November. But there is a fly in the ointment for both the Democrats and the Republicans, for Trump and for Biden. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, RFK is a man who tried to take on Biden in the Democratic primary, but that was effectively rigged. So he decided, bugger it, I'm going to go off and I'm going to be an independent candidate. Now, the chance of him getting onto all 50 states is unlikely. The ballot, meaning his capacity to get 270 electoral votes, is virtually impossible. But, we learned over the weekend that his name is now being added to the list of possible candidates that you can vote for in one of those key swing states. And it really matters. Because if he can get onto the swing state ballot, then it's not a race in two. There is a third-party option, and it is a third-party option that could be as much as 15% in some of the states. Now, even when RFK gets into the race, this is what the polling shows us. Wisconsin would change. It would become a Biden state, not a Trump state. Everything else would remain right now a Trump state. But the margins are even tighter than when I showed you the race between Biden and Trump. So yes, Trump is in front, but right now he is as far in front as some people may give you the impression of, and it's certainly not what the data is telling us. It is getting tighter. At this stage, there are some states where RFK takes more off the Republicans than he does the Democrats, but then it's the complete reverse in other states, and it's the reason why Trump remains strong in 6 of those 7 swing states. Now, as we know, today is the opening day. By the time you wake up tomorrow morning, you will have heard the opening statements in the court case against Donald Trump. Remember, it's not about hush money, it's about the accounting of hush money. And all of that will play out in the next little while. We believe the first person to give evidence after the opening comments of both the defence and the prosecution will be a bloke called David Pecker. David Pecker used to run the National Enquirer. Here he is, pictured with Donald Trump. Now, the National Enquirer was the type of place that would pay for a story. And the suggestion is that there were plenty of times when stories were paid for but were never printed because it was a way of hiding the information ever getting out. But because the people got paid, they stayed quiet. That in part will be the start of what's going to be taking place today. But as we know, and as Megyn Kelly had great fun with last week, the Trump derangement porn will be on show. Remember last week, everyone lost their brain because Trump had fallen asleep while sitting in the courtroom day after day. But I'm sorry for this. Apparently the latest theory being pushed around, not by loonies on the internet, but the bloke who, of course, was famous for saying it's the economy, stupid, James Carville, an absolute legend of Democrat presidential politics. Well, he claims Trump's biggest problem isn't falling asleep at the table. Apparently it's something a little more noticeable. There was a video. I saved you from it. Quick break, back with more. Big debate coming up now. Matt Canavan, Sam Crosby and a whole lot more. If you'd like to get in touch, you know what to do. Email paul@skynews.com.au. Sunday night, we're going to be in Renmark in South Australia. If you'd like to join us there, please send me an email. ourtown@skynews.com.au. Just getting started. Let's rip in. Thank you very much for watching. As always, we're joined by the wonderful Sam Crosby to argue nothing but common sense that everyone will agree with. Is that a better intro for you?
That's lovely.
You always whinge when I do.
That's lovely.
The bloke will, of course, point out that most of what he has to say is wrong. Is none other than Senator Matt Canavan, who's joining us now as well. And he will, of course, be the one with all of the sanity. But we'll see what happens. So, latest polls, take your pick. Albo's struggling. Now, at this moment, if there was an election, there'd be a minority government and, you know, we'll take winning over anything. But Matt Canavan, do you think that people have started to turn in a fashion where a significant number of those who changed in 22 have started to change back, or as we saw with the Catherine wheel of we're doing something about cost of living that really was too little too late tax cuts that moved some numbers a little bit around in January, gets to move back towards Labor when they're using 40 million of our dollars to ram it down our throat that our government really cares?
Well, I think this poll shows pretty much the status quo or the state of play at the moment, that the government is struggling, and it's a pretty close situation. I don't think it's unclear why the government is struggling. You've got a Prime Minister today who seems to think the biggest issue in the country is misinformation, when he is the biggest peddler of misinformation in this nation. He promised the Australian people at the last election that he would cut their power bills by $275, and he hasn't done so. That's why he's struggling. He's struggling because Australian families are struggling under his policies, and they want him to focus on those struggles, and instead he's distracted by all these other issues. So look, that's not rocket science in my mind, but I would also say on our side of the coin that we've still got work to do too. The vote for minor parties remains high, and to form government, to be in an election-winning position over the next year, we have to fight really hard to get the support of people back. So that's a challenge for us, but I definitely think the next election's there for the taking.
Sam, is the assumption of Labor people that the Teals don't move, so therefore Dutton can't get close, so we can lose some bark, but we end up winning anyway? And would that be a dangerous thing for people to think?
I don't think it is. I don't think it is what they're thinking, and if it is, they are very, very mistaken. Look, the great fear with Peter Dutton is that people think he's unelectable, right? And in that instance, that's the point where people are free to then go and register a protest vote. Albanese is a long-time political animal. He's aware of this. He is taking it absolutely very seriously. Look, I guess there's 2 points to say about the polls today. The first, and I guess the big one, is I'd still prefer to be us than them, right? I'd still prefer to be in the government's shoes than the opposition shoes. The second point is, you don't win grand finals in April, right? So we've still got another, 10 months, year to go before the next election, something in that order. The money's only just started to flow from the housing fund. Matt made a point earlier about the electricity fare. The power bill started to come down. They're scheduling another, X percent that they're hoping that it's going to come down. Is it going to be enough? I don't know. But there's still a little bit of runway to go before people,
Probably not.
start to feel that it's.
But this is my point, right? Which is that and I remember this from the last mob, right? Which is that very easily people can get distracted by the big numbers that they see in Canberra, right? So the cost of stage roads, $109 billion, and if you 10x that, it's $5 trillion. All right. But when you actually get down to $14 a week, it doesn't feel like a great needle mover, right? Yes, you're right about directions of things, but if it's not a sizable change, then again, they will stand up there on budget days and say, look at this wonderful 35 million this and 25 million that. But if it doesn't actually connect to where people are and about changing their own life circumstances, then I think the government is sort of talking to the press gallery, not actually connecting with the people saying, hey, can you do something for me?
Look, it's a fair point. I mean, I've always been of the view that tax cuts are gone within a couple of weeks, correct, right? You get a couple of pays and then you bank in that whatever amount of money is and it's gone. My personal view is spend it on housing. I've said this all the way through. Put another zero behind the amount that you're spending on housing and actually do something to get people, the 100 and whatever thousand people that are sleeping rough each night, do something to get them in a home, and that's something that people will reward you for.
Well, I would also argue, Matt, too, that when homelessness is the highest that it's been, when 3.7 million people are having trouble feeding themselves, I think it's unconscionable for a government to be in a budget surplus when that money in some way should be being delivered directly to the charity sector. I mean, as I spoke about before, they spent $40 million on ads telling us that too little, too late tax cuts are great. They only gave $15 million extra to the charity sector, who are the ones actually dealing with the coldface, and the coldface is getting colder by the day.
Well, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, Paul. I think we do have to balance our budget because one of the reasons that certainly some people are struggling to find housing is because of the very high interest rates we've got, and that is a consequence of too much government spending and borrowing that we did over the last few years through COVID. So if we continue that, that'll only exacerbate that issue. So we have to balance the budget, but what we should be doing is looking to cut the government waste that clearly occurs and free that up to help those people that are struggling. And more needs to be done, of course, on the big gorilla of all of that is the NDIS. Too many people are getting money off that public teat that don't need it. Plenty of people do need it, but there's plenty of people who do not, and there needs to be greater focus on that so we can free up that money to help those people really struggling.
All right, I'm going to take a quick break because I think we're in for an interesting discussion in a moment or two's time. Why? Because Scotland has decided to walk away from the very environmental commitments that places like Queensland are signing up to by the day. So make the most of the people who support us, support them, and then we'll have plenty of time to debate on the other side here on Paul Murray Live. Interesting story out of Scotland. Scotland originally was going to go for a 75% emissions cut. They've now decided they won't be going there. At the same time as when Queensland is doubling down on that as their future. Matt Canavan is here, along with Sam Crosby. So, Matt, let's talk about this here. Now, obviously, Scotland is a subset of the UK's wider economy, but we are seeing countries around the world who basically put these giant targets out there, rolling back from them because they can't achieve them.
Well, yes, exactly, Paul. Many of these targets have been set in a similar way to St Augustine's plea to God that please make me chaste, but just not yet. And so, time and time again, we've seen governments say, yeah, I'm going to cut our emissions in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time. Well, the day of judgment is coming due now for these governments. And Scotland had set an absurd target a number of years ago to cut their emissions by 75% by 2030. Which of course now is only 5 years or so away, and everybody but Blind Freddie can see that Scotland's not going to cut its emissions by 75% by 2030. And just last week now we've had the absurd situation of the Queensland government repeating this error, saying they're going to cut their emissions by 75% in the next 10 years. Even though, Paul, every sector of the Queensland economy, every sector, has failed to cut its emissions by any perceived amount in the last 2 decades. So transport emissions from vehicles, about the same. Emissions from electricity, about the same. We haven't shut coal-fired power stations down here. The only way we've cut carbon emissions here in Queensland is by locking up land or converting farmland to forest. That's it. There's been a massive increase in that. So we've stopped growing as much food as we used to, stopped having as much land to grow food, locked it up. A massive cost on farmers by doing so, because many of these lockups have been done through legal changes to the Queensland laws about and around native vegetation clearing. No compensation of farmers. That's how we've done it so far, and that's not sustainable. And the idea we're going to cut driving around in cars by 75% in 10 years is just total stuff on steroids. We've got to get common sense back into government before it's too late. For the pain's going to be enormous for people. Yeah,
if our control room can show some of those graphs that you tweeted out a little bit earlier in the day, hopefully I can put those up while we're having part of this conversation here. Again, this is all by the different sectors, not just the commentary that was there. But Sam, again, there's the evidence that Matt was tweeting out today, again, with the one exception of locking up land. The government's got a whole bunch of plans. They've got a great plan to move towards a similar goal to Scotland, but geez, they've got to get moving, don't they?
They do have to get moving, but it's good to have a little bit of ambition. It's good to have a government with a little bit of get up and go. And
nice to have a plan.
Matt raises a good point. And I'm just curious why the LNP in Queensland have backed in this announcement from the government.
I am too.
I'd love to know. I mean, if it's as dire as Matt's saying...
I'd love to talk about that. You yield your time.
Why is the LNP following along?
I'm happy to...
I think Sam may yield this. Why did the LNP do this?
I say good on them.
I'm totally at a loss,
I say good on them.
I don't understand what... Yeah, I don't understand. There's a revolt going on. I got bailed up at the servo just before in Rockhampton by someone outraged by the LNP stance, one of our good supporters over many years. My understanding is the Toowoomba North branch tonight has moved motions against the LNP parliamentary party's position on these emission targets. It's just beggars belief that we think that somehow signing up to these absurd, ridiculous, radical plans is a way to either win elections or win support. As I say, someone's got to stand up for common sense here. Maybe the reason have no common sense. There's nothing to them.
Maybe the reason is that the people of Queensland actually want to see something done on climate change. And look, maybe 75% is too high.
Well, we tried that. We tried, but Sam, we tried that. We tried that federally and obviously failed to win the election. Now we were a fourth-term government. Fair enough. The Victorian Liberals tried that. They tried to double down on a massive climate plan and failed. The South Australian Liberal were in government, did the same. WA tried to remember they were going to shut down all the coal-fired power stations early. Got absolutely towed.
Yeah, but Matt,
I mean, I don't know how many more points of evidence you have to see here.
But there's lots that go into an election win or loss,
outside of politics.
But there's lots that goes into an election win or loss. You can't say that it was that one thing.
Sure,
when there's 50 other things on the table.
On that token, Sam, maybe the LNP will win this year, regardless, because the government up here is hopeless, and there does need to be a change. I want to see a change. I think most people do. They might eke out a change, but the problem for us and the people up here in the bush, Sam, is we're just sick and tired of being the ones that have to bear the weight of emissions reductions. We're the ones having to suffer through wind turbines and solar panels, and no one in the city has to live next to.
Correct.
No one would want to. We're the ones having this land locked up, which hurts our agricultural industry, which doesn't just hurt farmers, it then hurts the broader economy that relies on having farm activity around a country town. Yet, as I say, these people in the cities continue to fly all overseas, continue to drive whatever they like, continue to charge their Teslas at night using coal-fired power. They pay no price. And they're the ones out there. They're preening about how they're moral guardians of the galaxy by saving the globe, but they're not the ones paying the price. And we're sick and tired of it. And I'm going to fight back against that as much as I can, as long as I have some kind of fight in this political game, because people don't deserve this out here in the bush.
Well, and as my point is always right, which is that if there's anyone's willing to give up their doggy park in the valley to put some solar farms there, or maybe at Kangaroo Point we could have some wind farms, but of course none of that'll be happening. Instead, it's all just assumed to just go into the bush. Interesting, there was an environmental decision, thankfully in Queensland, that's going to save some rainforest from being torn down. Got a couple of minutes left, and it's a bigger topic than a couple of minutes, but let's do the bumper sticker version anyway. Sam, the censoring of the internet planned by the government when it comes to misinformation. They're now trying to basically use the videos of last week as the Trojan horse for what you can and can't share on the internet, which would include, editorials from this program that the government may deem to be misinformation.
I would be a lot more sympathetic to Elon Musk's cause with two caveats. One is verification. If you're actually going to say, no, when Paul Murray goes on and he's verified as Paul Murray, then that's right. If you defame me, I can sue you, fine. But if you're just doing it as, your Joe Blogs, well, who do I know who's defaming, right? So that's the first point. The second point is I'm actually quite relaxed about the free internet content, but when you start publishing something, you can measure on a meta platform. You're seeing how many words I'm writing, what the size of the ad is. If you're taking my money, then you are a publisher of my work. Yes. Therefore, that work, which is a river of gold for every internet service provider you can imagine, that work should be subject to all these same strictures that Sky News is, that the Sydney Morning Herald is, or anything else.
Yes, but the point is that, and again, because the ambiguity in the law, Senator, is about whether legitimate news organisations end up getting lefty fact checkers turning around and saying, that content, with that thing Matt Canavan said on that show is misinformation, therefore the sharing
which
of
it was.
If it stays, it's not. As if it stays up, then you get a $500,000 fine. And I'm concerned here. Now, again, I'm pretty sure where Peter Dutton's position is, which is about the videos and crime, but there's a line in the sand here about what people can post.
Well, even on the videos, Paul, you can see the bias that's there in the e-safety commissioner. There's been a big campaign here against X, obviously, but I just did a search before I came on Facebook. First video that came up was the stabbing. It's still on there. So where's the outrage on that? I don't get it. And the ABC still has a video, a very violent video, more violent than the stabbing of the terrible death of Kyle Walker in Yuendamu last year by that police officer. That's still up online. This is the problem. Once you start policing speech, I think invariably questions have to get asked about who is the policeman or women, and what are their biases and how they get introduced to determine the political debate. And that's what I'm very concerned about here. And obviously you're right to say Albo's using this now as a Trojan horse to say these graphic, violent videos mean we have to crack down on misinformation. But it's got nothing to do with that. He's just trying to push his own agenda here to silence the debate against his own government.
100%. Thank you, mate. Do appreciate it. Senator, future senators, I do appreciate it. Quick break, back with more. Plenty to talk about here on Paul Murray Live. Don't forget, Renmark, Sunday, our town at skynews.com.au. Late debate next.